Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal-Brainspace, the industry's leading AI eDiscovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Socha, weekly with leaders in eDiscovery. Thank you for tuning in.
Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha, Senior Vice President of Brand Awareness at Reveal. Each Friday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, I host an episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. Our guest this week is Scott Milner. Scott is a partner at Morgan Lewis. He is also a Chambers ranked litigator and legal entrepreneur who has practiced at the intersection of law, technology, and design for nearly 2 decades. He is the co-leader and one of the original attorneys of Morgan Lewis's eData practice, a data-driven practice that combines great lawyering with technology and design to enhance the delivery of legal services. I could go on at length and talk about Scott's expertise and skills in virtually all aspects of eDiscovery. If you're interested, go check out his bio on their website or on LinkedIn. One other thing to add, Scott and I, for a number of years now, have been part of the planning committee for the University of Florida eDiscovery Conference, which will be coming up February 8th and 9th, I believe. Scott, welcome.
Thanks, George. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the kind words for the introduction.
Oh, anytime. And I would go on, but by the time I got done, we wouldn't have any time to talk.
Listen, when you still say nearly 2 decades, that already makes me cringe thinking, I never realized I'd be in eDiscovery, but especially not 2 decades, but it's been awesome.
Right, because I'm sure, well, I know you, same with me, we did not set out to become eDiscovery lawyers. So before we get into the topics of the day, since you brought that up, why don't you tell folks briefly how it is you got from aspiring young lawyer leaving law school to 2 decades as an eDiscovery attorney?
Yeah, so it was really, I was fortunate, I guess, in one instance where coming out of law school in a pretty tough job market, I had to look for different ways of how to make a difference. And I loved the idea of process and the business side of law as well. So I actually got placed on a contract position at Morgan Lewis and got to work with my partner and great friend, Tess Blair, who was at that point a mid-level associate. And she brought me in on a case to help with going to warehouses with thousands and thousands of boxes. And she's like, can we solve this problem? So she had this great idea about building a process around popping the lids instead of scanning thousands of boxes and addressing it a different way. So we called it triage. And then from there, we digitized all the records that we identified and flagged from all these warehouses for cases. And we did some review back then. We actually started in JFS Litigator's Notebook, not to age myself, then moved to good old Concordance. But so I really kind of fell into it, but we saw that we could build a defensible, repeatable process for these type of cases. And Tess and the firm said, let's build something. Would you like to join? So I was happy to be the first hire, and the rest is history.
And it's gone from far more than just 2 of you.
Yeah, just a little bit. Now we're well over 30 lawyers and 60 technologists and all kinds of new roles that we never would have thought of when I was joining the team, like data scientists, AI developers. It's been a great experience, and that's why I love it. 2 decades doesn't feel like 2 decades. It feels, like I'm still excited about going in and participating every day in what the team is building.
When Morgan Lewis launched that practice, I mean, I think it's fair to call it a practice. It was one of the very first law firms to do that, no?
Yeah, it was. I know there was some firms that had some in-house support of different technologies, like the traditional litigation support role. Some people had lawyers that were doing some counseling on the discovery side, but we formalized the practice into a standalone practice of the firm where everybody in the group is dedicated 100% to eDiscovery and the other initiatives that we have, like information governance, data, cyber, contract analytics, our ML Force program. So we are 100% full in on that. No longer I spent half my time doing antitrust litigation, but also know a little bit about eDiscovery.
Well, you gave me a good lead in there to the topic I'd like us to turn our attention to. None of what you're doing in this practice could be done without the use of technology. And yes, as Browning Marion used to say, technology created this problem, giving us email and all of that. Technology is what's going to have to get us out of this problem. Talk to us about technology, the use of it to address the challenges and the new challenges we face, and how you can use it and how others can use it to redefine how we deliver legal services.
Absolutely. And this is a topic near and dear to my heart. Well, let me take one step back, because I'm a huge believer in technology. But I think before people look at what technology the problem solves, you have to actually identify what problem you're trying to solve. Because often I've seen people purchase technology without thinking about what are they working to do. And then when it doesn't work, there's frustration. And then you see a slow adoption or a non-adoption to actually leveraging technology and using technology. So for me, first thing we do in the practice, we say, okay, what problem are we looking at? Is it an internal facing? Is it a client challenge? Is it something just to advance the practice of law? And then once we identify the problem, we build processes around it. And at that point, then we look for the technology to actually support driving that process to make sure we're delivering services and we can do it in a competitive way. The clients feel like it's a win, and we've not only reduced risk, but we offered value both internally and externally.
The first step in that process that you laid out is identifying the problem. What are some of the problems, or what's the range of problems you end up dealing with?
Yeah, I think they fall in a number of buckets, but one of the big ones that we see a lot of is investigations and internal investigations, because it's not necessarily, everybody says, well, it's just eDiscovery, but I don't believe it is just eDiscovery, because in eDiscovery, there's proportionality. You may have to defend your process. There's a whole lot of steps that go in to eDiscovery that in an investigation, you may have a little bit more flexibility in your workflow. So when I'm looking at an investigation, I'm often finding out, well, how do I get data for somebody who may be a bad actor that I'm trying to investigate behind the scenes? How do I focus on wanting more data than less, maybe in eDiscovery? Because the more I have, the more information I can gather to tell the story, to find out whether there was a problem or not. In eDiscovery, we're always talking about what the cost is to do it. But here, sometimes I need hundreds of gigabytes of data. I need mobile data. I need Slack. I need Teams. Whereas sometimes in litigation, you do not need that. So that's an area where once we define that problem, then it's building a process around how do we address now balancing costs, but getting to answers faster, leveraging the technology.
What then can those processes look like that you build?
Yeah, so we've actually put together a lot of what I'll say automated reporting, leveraging analytic platforms like Brainspace. We've been a big believer in tools like sentiment analysis, anomaly detection, the whole, I call it social networking, right? Seeing who's talking to who, because that often will give me enough information. So we've pre-built a lot of automation. Once we run Brainspace, we've got automated reports and dashboards that our attorneys who are actually knee deep in the investigation can leverage, be like, all right, you know what? These are the 50 documents I need to review right away. And then we'll figure out where we go from there. For me, it's a little bit like starting inside the onion and working out versus, and rather than kind of tackling everything and just saying, all right, we got to review 1 million documents, which we're never going to do in an investigation. The answers need to be found much faster. Yeah,
and you need to find something to help you figure out what to do next. You don't need to find all variations of that something.
That's right. There's no one's asking me until we have to report maybe, and then we'll obviously adjust our process. But they just need to know enough to figure out where to go next, and that's what we guide them with some quick analytics, and really kind of focused on what the tool's saying. Hey, you may want to look here. It may not be right. There's oftentimes I've seen an anomaly that's just an anomaly, but has nothing related to the investigation or the allegations that we have, and that's okay.
You've used the phrase anomaly detection. and referred to anomalies several times. What do you mean by anomaly detection? And then what do you do with that to help advance the client's cause?
So anomaly detection from our perspective is where the technology is pointing us to data sets that appear different than the remainder of the data set. So I'm a visual learner. I need to see my data. So everybody that uses the Enron and teaches me, it doesn't do much for me. So I actually, have a private database with my old email data involved. And so I'll give you an example. One of the anomalies that the platform identified for me was that between me and one of my associates and one of my partners in litigation in Houston, we had 422 emails on one weekend and that's completely different than any of the other communications that we've had throughout the rest of our practice that we've worked together. Now, this could mean nothing, right? But if this was a harassment case, or this was a bad faith case, that may be something to say, okay, well, the litigator in Houston is out alleging that I, only put them on weekend projects. And so how am I going to run search terms to find those type of records or that type of view into it? You can't. So it gave me it gave me nightmares because I remember the case that we were working on around the clock during that weekend, but it was something that we just can't do with search terms. And so having analytics and the capability to kind of find those records to say, all right, thumbs up, this is exactly what we need. Or you know what? Technology is not perfect, but at least I wouldn't have found that. And I would have never been able to tie that all together.
So one form of anomaly you mentioned is communicate a larger than normal number, or usual number of communications in a period of time. Another one you mentioned is communications at an unusual period of time. What other sorts of anomalies do you look for?
Well, just, those have been most of the primary ones we focus on, but it's just use of language. So, are people changing the way they talk about the communications? Are they referring to maybe off-platform discussions where you don't raise this and then you're now talking is slightly different, or shorter communications versus longer communications? Trending where you're only having one-on-ones with George, but you're having one-to-many with, insert some other, person that you're working with. So again, depending on what I'm trying to find, I kind of focus in on the anomalies that are presented to me for consideration, and then I can kind of address, what makes the most sense to truly spend time, reviewing and analyzing further.
When you first identify an anomaly or a potential anomaly, rather an anomaly potentially of value to you, where do you then go? What comes next?
Yeah, so from there, obviously, our focus is analyzing the records in that anomaly. And then we may apply at that point some continuous active learning, right? So we've got some positives, we've got some negatives. And then it's like, all right, what else outside of the anomaly may also be indicative of what we need to look at? Who are we communicating with? Are there other anomalies with similar issues that I'm interested in that maybe with other people that may also be like, oh, I didn't collect Bob's data. I didn't collect Jane's data. So that's where we'll ultimately take it, is kind of see what we need to go. But this also we need to right size the solution. It may be after that one anomaly, we may be done for what we needed to do to solve that problem or answer the client's questions. It's only when we need to go a little bit further that we'll take some of these other platforms and tools available to us to help with that.
That takes me to my next question, which is, as you talk, I had in my mind this picture of kind of a dot in the center and this growing web of sort of cracks or lines spreading out from it and potentially going out infinitely. How do you know when to stop? How do you know when you've done enough?
Well, obviously it depends on the issue. I mean, if it's an investigation for me, it's constant communication with the client and the lawyers that are running the investigation. And I will point to them saying, okay, if we want to tackle this, to go into your scenario, we want to tackle this line, which seems a little bit more likely to be relevant. It's a thicker line, so maybe has a little bit more indicia to potentially tie onto this allegation. Here's what the impact is and the cost is. So I think a little bit about is, what does the client ultimately want to get out of this, and how much do we want to go forward? Because as you know, we can look to uncover a lot of different things. So I think we really need to focus on what is right sizing the solution. Now, if it's a litigation, obviously a lot of it depends on what I've negotiated, where my stop point is, if I, what the validation is. I may do a lot of null set testing or illusion testing on the set to be like, all right, I feel pretty comfortable that I haven't missed a lot. So, there's a lot of that we'll do depending on the defensibility and the needs of the matter.
One of the other things you mentioned early on was sentiment analysis. So explain that and tell us how you make use of that.
Yeah, so the sentiment analysis is really what the platform is trying to share, whether it believes it's a positive sentiment, a negative sentiment, or a neutral sentiment. So I'll give you another example. So we were testing sentiment analysis. One of the things we did is we took the Twitter feed that was happening during a Eagles versus New York Giants, so rival football, the Twitter feed from that. We ran it through the platform, and it was kind of fun to see what the platform identified as positive sentiment and negative sentiment. So, people like, go Eagles, maybe positive, right? And then when the Eagles were probably getting beat because it was a tough year for the Eagles, there may have been some cursing. There may have been some, we stink, trade this quarterback, fire the coach, a little bit more of the negative side. So, the platform's trying to take taking the natural language and the communication style and trying to assign what do they believe the person was writing was trying to get out of it. So, we all have, I have an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old, and sometimes, they'll send me a text that they think is funny, but if you read the actual words, it's probably more negative. And then when you add emojis and other stuff, it obviously can change the entire story around them.
In your experiment then with sentiment analysis, did you ultimately give it a grade? Did it get a passing grade?
It passed. It's not perfect. And that's why I was trying to explain that no technology is going to solve all the problems. I like when people say AI, I know people are very big on the word artificial. I still believe in the word augmented intelligence. It still needs input. It needs feedback. If anybody that's going in saying this is going to solve my problem, I'm not going to do anything to give it feedback to help learn, I think we'll miss the boat. And that's why you'll continue to see slow adoption, because everybody will feel frustrated that it wasn't perfect. And it's really there to me to augment and expedite the, kind of where we need to go and support that process.
Yeah, and I tend to think of it as if not this, then what situation. Well, if you're not going to use this tool, then what are you going to do?
You know what you're going to do? You're going to miss a lot.
Better or worse.
You're going to miss a lot, right? And that's part of the problem.
Yeah. There are uses for these technologies that you're discussing that go beyond traditional eDiscovery. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm a huge fan. I'm looking. Everybody talks about people, process, and technology, and I'm a big fan of finding out like what really works outside of core eDiscovery. And so we've been a big fan of kind of the whole war games testing, a lot of the platforms and a lot of the workflows that we've used for things like due diligence and data mining from contracts. Talking about the data incident response and data breach issues. I actually our last panel, not that we were on together, but at UF, I think one of the speakers said this, and they're not wrong. It's not if you're going to get a data incident, it's when, and it's how you handle it. So we've been looking at a lot of the technology to identify personally identifiable information. How do you grab that and export it out using some of the same tools that are available that we're using daily in eDiscovery, or we should be using daily in eDiscovery. So I joke now, not only am I, still practicing full time as an eDiscovery attorney, but I joke now I'm a little bit more on the transactional side. So I've had to learn a little bit about, what it means and some of the fields mean in a contract. We're doing a lot more on the data incident side. And so learning, what rises the level to notification requirements under some of there. And then we're obviously bracing for the increased data privacy issues and provisions and laws that are going in the U.S. I think everybody's comfortable or starts to understand, ex-U.S. data privacy considerations, but the number of states that are introducing legislation and requirements to protect personally identifiable information is only growing.
As you look at these augmented intelligence technologies and similar tools for use in things like DSAR and data incident response, What have the grades been? Did they get a passing grade, a failing grade? What's the landscape look like today?
Yeah, we've actually seen them have real impact. We've seen them definitely expedite getting to the information faster than, we bolster a lot of our, especially in these new service offerings and new ways of leveraging the same platforms. We'll do a lot of it with, hey, let's just run this and see what it does, but let's also run the traditional workflows that people are comfortable with until I can show them through validation that this process actually drove efficiency there. So we're still we have a whole list of terms that we run, apply for PII. We use regular expressions, still searching. But then this tool just says, what did we miss? And by the way, what did this tool say is not PII that our searches are saying is PII, and figure out what the delta is and who's right and who's wrong there. So we've been quite happy that it has absolutely been a value add, another, I would say, kind of tool in our tool shed to support these other areas of opportunity and really to support our clients there.
How about on the contract analysis side? How do the tools seem to be working there? I know there's a lot of apparent activity on that front these days. Yeah. I don't know how far it really goes. What are you seeing?
Yeah, we've not seen anything perfect out of the box. I'll just, complete transparency there. We've seen a lot where you invest the time in putting contracts in, giving it feedback, and they're getting much stronger. So now we're trying to take that first level data mining experience and exposure and work away from people that don't really need to do that. And we want to give them the ability to kind of say, all right, yeah, you got the choice of law correctly. You've got the assignability provision correctly. You've got these terms correctly. All right, boom. Well, this one's actually missed. And then we are learning from that. And then from there, what we want to do is we want to get that data exported to the subject matter experts to actually evaluate, if a company is divesting their business, how many of these contracts need to be renegotiated? How many contracts need to be addressed through some sort of data privacy agreement addendum? So we found it's not perfect, but it's definitely doing a good job working through some of that first line work that we have with continued feedback, continued feedback loop.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to go up to the top shelf, bring down the old crystal ball, dust off the top, and tell me where you think the use of these technologies outside traditional eDiscovery will be a year from now, 5 years from now, whatever time frame you want. What does the future look like here?
It's a great question. I mean, I think the technology is going to be more mainstream. I think it's going to be a big use. I think compliance is going to be an area of real opportunity. Talking to lawyers and in-house folks who are dealing with compliance issues, a lot of the analytics that are available in our platforms are perfectly ripe for that type of work. I truly believe we're finally getting to a point where it's adopted and accepted. And it's funny, I know you say crystal ball in other areas, but I'm still seeing some significant hesitancy in our own backyard. So my hope is in the next couple of years, we will finally get, and I say own backyard, meaning the eDiscovery, bubble industry. I still sometimes need to explain what, CAL is and what, why analytics. And I'm hoping that within 3 to 5 years, that's going to be going away. And as we get more comfortable in our personal lives with these platforms, I'm hoping that will drive, adoption and change there. And we're all working smarter, not harder. And I think that's the tools are really going to need to be there to support that.
So now the corollary to that last question, how will all of these changes in the technology affect the practice at a place like Morgan Lewis? What will that look like a year, 5 years, or whatever you want from now?
So one, we're already seeing it. The amount of projects, the amount of data that we're touching and addressing with the same size team is many multiples. So what that shows me as one of the leaders of the group is that we are leveraging these technologies to get through significantly higher volumes of data with the same size team. So, from that perspective, that's only going to continue to grow. We've also seen a lot of our team show a desire to use the word pivot to learning other areas of our expertise. So we've now got a team focused on the contract analytics side. We've got teams focused on the data incident response. So they're no longer just that manager view traditional eDiscovery attorney role, they're looking for that expertise in these other areas to be able to apply their skills and their knowledge.
We've got a few minutes left here. I'd like to shift and go in a very different direction and talk about branding and personal brand as well as professional brand, and your take on all of that.
Well, I think for me, the personal brand is important as my professional brand. I mean, I represent the firm, I represent my role at in the organization, and so I think my story is a little bit interesting in the sense that I used to leave LinkedIn purely for work related, right? It was sharing articles, it was maybe sharing something from the firm, and over the last year, particularly when I just got burnt out, we were all burnt out during quarantine, we were all burnt out during the pandemic. I started to try to put a little bit more personal things. And it's how I also interacted with my clients. And the irony is I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback by, I guess, showing a little bit of who we are. And I love when I see my LinkedIn feed, not just the personal or the business side, but a little bit more of the personal side as well, because it creates real relationships. We're all human. We have to have compassion. And I think if anything, my hope is after the pandemic that we take a little bit of that out and we share that compassion that no one's perfect. We're all learning. Some of the things that we deal with, every day is a learning experience. And I love being able to connect with my friends, my industry friends, my clients, my colleagues, even sometimes my peers at other organizations and companies. I love learning a little bit more about who they are and what makes them tick. So that's a little bit about where I decided to take my journey in the LinkedIn space, was a little bit more of that balance, not just business, but also some personal as well.
How much of the personal side then do you, if you'll pardon the pun, reveal on LinkedIn?
Well, it's more about what I think, are activities that are of interest to my network. I connected a lot with different groups within the industry and clients through exercise. So posting stories about, crazy races that one of my friends or people signed me up for, the amount of people that reached out that they were always also doing that was a great way for me to connect with them on something different. That we didn't have to be in the same physical location, didn't have to be a lunch or a dinner. It could be talking about, hey, when are you signing up for that next Spartan race? And I've learned a little bit about wait, maybe I can push myself a little bit more with some of the challenges that my clients are doing to be more fun. So I think that's, where I kind of go with my revealing of my personal life.
So with that teaser, you got to tell us, what's the craziest race you've done?
I don't know if it's the craziest. It was the hardest race I did. It was this last, I guess it was in the spring. I did a Spartan Beast in Big Bear. And I don't like to read.
What's a Spartan Beast?
Yeah, so it's 12 to 13 miles in mountains with a lot of obstacles. And so I did one about 3 years before that in Squaw Valley. And I was like, it was tough, but I was like, this was manageable. I feel good about it. I didn't research anything about this race and had no clue that it was the second hardest course that Spartan does. And living in Philadelphia, training in altitude is impossible. So I didn't actually appreciate the elevation change. So it was I think about 13 miles, finished it in 5 hours. And it was probably the first time I've cried in a long time. When I finished, the amount of pain I was in, I was like, I about tapped out a couple times. But it was great. It feels good to push yourself. And so that was probably the craziest. And I think the pain has finally subsided and out of my body that I'm going to be crazy enough to sign up for another one. But I think I'm going to do a little bit more research to make sure I don't somehow inadvertently sign up for the number one toughest race unless I'm really going to train for that.
So I got 2 follow-ups on that. First, if this was the number 2, when are you signing up for the number 1 and where is it?
Pass. It's in Killington, Vermont. And I think it actually just was I think it may have just happened. Somebody's like, you sure you don't want to do last minute? And I go, yeah, I'm positive. Not ready for that.
But there's next year, right?
There's always next year.
Then second, if you're really looking for tough races, I forget what it's called. And I don't think Florida and Philly as you are, you'll really want to do this. There is a race in northern Minnesota, I think in January or February. If I recall, it's 135 miles. You do it overnight. So you got to take something to sleep in. You got to take some food with you. You can run it, ski it, or bicycle it. Hardly anybody ever finishes it. You might lose some toes, and I'm not exaggerating, or some fingers, because that does happen. So if you're looking for a really insane, probably really stupid challenge, there's that one hanging out there for you.
Yeah, that's gonna be a hard pass. I think my kids may love to hear that. They're like, insurance quicker, but no, I kid. But no, there's that. I think the cold is what I don't mind the 135 miles. I don't mind like beyond pushing myself. It's the cold piece that would get me.
Well, it's only like 30 degrees below zero.
Yeah. It's okay. I barely go to football games in December and January in Philadelphia these days. I don't think trying to run a race would work very well for me.
Well, Scott, thank you very much for joining us today. Scott Milner is a partner with Morgan Lewis. I am George Socha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal.